The NBA draft is less than 2 days away. There is plenty to discuss with regard to the Atlanta Hawks, the rumor mill, some mailbag questions, and more on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1502 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Tuesday evening into Wednesday. And today's show is brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook partner of Locked On Podcast Network. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn right now to get started. Also, at the top of the podcast, I should tell you to make us your first listen here at Locked On Hawks each and every day. Check us out and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts, places like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, YouTube on the video side, and many more. And again, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. It's basically going to be a little bit of a rundown of the latest rumors around the Atlanta Hawks as the NBA draft is less than 48 hours away. We are in that time of the cycle where you really can't hold anything, and I'm trying to wait and record at a good time, and it's late in the evening on Tuesday because there are some rumblings out there. Nothing to this point, as I'm starting this recording right now, has risen to the level of crazy high-level rumors or anything like that. No emergency podcast just yet, but plenty to get to in the last several days with regard to the latest rumors. I should also say at the top of the podcast, there's been plenty in this podcast feed. So if you're a new listener, I encourage you to go back into the archive over the last, 3, 4, 5 weeks. There has been wall-to-wall NBA draft coverage. People like Mark Schindler and Zach Milner. I had Tyler Jones on the podcast for a 2-part episode yesterday. Ben Pfeiffer's been on the show, Richard Stayman, etc. All kinds of draft coverage in the last several weeks, as well as this player capsule series I've done with Glenn Willis of ATL and 29 and Peachtree Hoops, talking about the entire Hawks roster to prepare for the offseason, what everybody kind of did this year on the roster, outlooks for the future, strengths, weaknesses, all that fun stuff, all in one place. So thank you for listening to the podcast, and we'll dive right in now to the latest rumblings before we get to some mailbag questions at the end of the show. First thing, actually, is a little bit of news, kind of. This broke after I recorded with Tyler on Monday evening, but the Hawks had a pretty high-profile draft workout in their building on Tuesday morning. Cason Wallace came in after he had announced previously, and then it was actually didn't happen. It was kind of announced and canceled for an undisclosed reason. I talked about that a lot when it happened a couple of weeks ago, but Wallace is the highest-rated player on my personal board that has come to Atlanta for a publicly announced draft workout. Landry Fields did say at the end of last week that the Hawks have had guys in that we do not know about. I don't know who those players are, but publicly, Cason Wallace is the highest-rated player that has come through the doors to this point. And it wasn't just Wallace either that actually came in today. He was joined by Ryan Rupert, a potential first-round pick, Brandon Podziemski, also another potential first-round pick, Seth Lundy, a guy I like a lot in the second round of this draft. This is another sort of offshoot, doesn't really matter that much, but it's either the number one or number two as far as like the best talent in one workout that have come through Atlanta to this point in time. The Hawks also did host a workout earlier in the cycle that had Chris Murray, Omax Prosper, Max Lewis, and Ben Shepherd, who are 4 of the top 30 guys on my board. So nobody as high as Wallace, but a little bit more depth there. Regardless, the Hawks have sort of been taken to task or questioned by fans and other people for like who's come in. And, if you look at the list of who's come in for workouts, it's not that bad, to be honest with you. And Wallace was actually mocked to the Hawks today by ESPN. Jonathan Givony and Jeremy Wu over there, sort of the highest profile standard mainstream mock, sending Wallace to the Hawks at 15 overall on Tuesday. So as I've said for weeks now, Wallace would be very high on my list of best case scenario kind of guys at 15 if the Hawks were to stay put and draft there. So a little bit of newsy stuff there at the top of the podcast. From there to the rumor mill. I'll start with this. Adrian Wojnarowski on Tuesday evening was part of this mock draft special on ESPN. That's always interesting kind of monitor. I had my eye on that, as you might expect. There was some, I would say, inaccurate aggregation that was going on in social media. They got people kind of excited and kind of in a tizzy about what he said. But if you actually watch the clip, there really isn't much new in this clip, and we'll talk about some of this stuff later on in this podcast, but I don't have the rights to play the audio for you, or I would. But Woj basically mentioned 3 guys as available. I'm not sure if this is a comprehensive list, but he mentioned 3 guys by name. It was John Collins, DeAndre Hunter, and then DeJounte Murray as guys who are at least available in trade. Nothing surprising there if you've been paying attention in the last few weeks. We'll come back to that later on. He also mentioned the potential for the Hawks to package 15 in the draft and a player or 2 or whatever to move up. We'll come back to that later on in this episode as well. And he mentioned the very obvious and present payroll concerns that the Hawks have with regard to pushing up beyond the luxury tax into the second apron range. that's all stuff we've talked about on this podcast before. And the last thing that he mentioned in that segment about the Hawks was that they're very active, like one of the most active teams in the league right now. That's makes some sense if you figure out everything else I just said. And also, he expects that it could be not just the draft week, but also into July on the trade market. So I will just say this right now. I'll probably say it again tomorrow. The Hawks do not have to make any moves at the draft. Obviously, with regard to draft picks, that becomes a different story. But as far as like the roster and trading Collins or Capella or Hunter or Murray or whatever, they don't have to do that now. They can wait till July. I know people are kind of itching for transactions, and it's kind of how this goes at this point in time. But they don't have to get all their business done now. If you remember last year, they did the Murray trade and the Herter trade on basically back-to-back days, and it was well after the draft. So keep that in mind. The big stuff does not always happen at the draft. From there, Jeff Schultz of The Athletic talked to Quinn Snyder this week, who actually apparently has been in the hospital twice in the last couple of weeks with kidney stones. No fun there, so hopefully Quinn is feeling better at this point. The headliner of that piece from Jeff is that Snyder basically dismissed the notion repeatedly that he has the ultimate decision-making power in the organization. Now, that's never been reported that he actually has all the power. I think I've said, and I still believe now, that Quinn has a pretty sizable voice in the organization beyond just coaching. But not a surprise at all that he would decline and sort of deny that reporting from Jeff. And he, like Landry Fields, talked about the collaborative process with Snyder, Fields, and Kyle Korver, along with, of course, people like Nick Ressler, Tony Ressler, etc. He touched on some of the rumors as well. Jeff did. Some of the roster, and I've said this before, I think Jeff Schultz has the best sources of any person working in Atlanta media. Obviously, not national stuff is different, but as far as like local reporting, I think Jeff is pretty dialed in across the board. Obviously covers different sports, but has really good sources up and down. So always monitoring what his intel says is probably a good idea. He described Capella as a real trade candidate, no surprise there, talking about Okongwu and cost-cutting measures. He wrote that DeAndre Hunter could be had in a trade, no surprise there either, but certainly notable. He did say on Twitter later on that he thought DeJounte Murray would not be moved if he had to guess, in part because the Hawks are going to be looking for a lot for him and kind of what they traded for him. And I think I agree with Jeff on this. They're not going to recoup that same value for DeJounte Murray. So if they're looking for that, it's not going to happen. Last thing here before we get to a break, and we'll have much more on the rumor mill in a second. I wrote a little bit about this earlier this week, actually, after a wave of Jake Fisher news from Yahoo on a couple of days ago. And I talked about that a little bit of other places, but not on this podcast. So first of all, Jake's a friend. I like Jake. He's very good at his job. And sort of the headliner that I think got a lot of attention was this. And I quote from Jake's piece. The Hawks have told opposing teams Atlanta is open to conversations about all of its roster outside of Trae Young, end quote. Now, it's something I've been saying for quite some time. But it's still notable intel that Jake is a mainstream national reporter reporting this. And even guys like DeJounte Murray or even AJ Griffin would be available for the right price. And I believe that. I think, as I've said before many times, Trae Young is not available. I think the only way that Trae Young gets traded in the near future would be to ask for and / demand a trade. He's not done that, so he's kind of off the market. Everybody else is at least available. There are varying degrees of available. I will always say that. I think DeJounte and AJ Griffin are probably in the highest tier of unavailable other than Trae. But obviously guys like Collins is probably the most available, along with Hunter, maybe Capella, etc. Fisher did say the Hawks are not actively shopping DeJounte Murray. That's not a surprise. And it would quote, cost a lot for the Hawks to move him. But, even if he's in a full tier by himself, we'll see. One more thing there from Jake. He reported that the Hawks are believed to be with someone in the mix, or at least be interested in Raptors forward Pascal Siakam. So Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer also reported interest in Siakam from the Hawks. No specifics just yet from anyone that I have seen about this. And really details are important here because it would seem to coincide with Toronto potentially going sort of on. I'm not sure it's going to be a full-scale rebuild, but they might lose Fred VanVleet. They obviously, OJ Anunoby could be traded. Gary Trent just opted in, but interesting kind of pivot times for the Raptors, and it could be building around Scotty Barnes. But importantly, Siakam's owed $38 million for this coming season, and then he hits unrestricted free agency. So it'd be a very big risk for any team to trade for Siakam because he might leave in a year. And that means also that I won't go into all the detail on this until it actually happens or gets more reporting on this, but the Hawks have to send at least one of their bigger salaries, probably one of the front court guys, plus more, maybe even DeJounte Murray. If I'm Toronto, I'd probably ask for DeJounte and more. We'll see. Plus the Raptors would be, asking for draft capital or young guys. And, I'm sure they want a piece of AJ Griffin or Jalen Johnson or both or whatever. So it would be a lot. Siakam is an all-star player. Obviously, he is obviously a good player as well. Never been terribly efficient. I'm not sure that I love the fit with Trae and DeJounte. If it was DeJounte going out, it makes a little bit more sense to me, but Siakam's a little bit older. I'll say that. Keep that in mind as well. And again, he's going to be asking for a boatload of money at the end of this season. I think he is a good supporting guy in some respects, but not necessarily a perfect one given his lack of efficiency, but a pretty big, he's big and long. He's a reasonable defender, can score obviously individually, etc. So a guy that, it makes sense to have interest in if you're the Hawks, if you want to get better right now, but I'm not sure what the logistics are. We'll see more on that. If it gets reported at a higher level, I will dive back into that with more detail, but that's at least been out there in the ether over the last couple of days. All right, we'll have more on the rumor mill in a second, but first, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. It's very easy to be caught up in everything that everyone needs from you all the time and never take a moment to actually think about what you need from yourself. I know I'm guilty of this as well, in the midst of juggling all kinds of work commitments across the board, family stuff. And when you really spend all of your time giving, it can sometimes leave everybody stretched pretty thin or even burned out. Therapy can give you tools that you're looking for to find more balance in your life. And part of that is being able to support others without leaving yourself behind. Therapy is exceptionally helpful when it comes to learning coping skills or even setting boundaries. It can also help you to be simply the best version of yourself. If you thought about starting therapy, I recommend giving BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire, and they will be matching you with a licensed therapist. If you're going to change therapists, they will do so and let you do so without any charge. Find more balance with BetterHelp today. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today. Get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. One more time, BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, and more on the rumor mill. Of course, there's never-ending piles of information this time of year, and obviously this is a good time to catch up on all of it. Here's one that we talked about a little bit with Tyler and I on the two-part episode that dropped on Monday. And by the way, again, please subscribe to the podcast, catch up on the archive. And that was a fun conversation with my friend Tyler, who is a fan favorite to be sure. It was reported by Jake that the Mavericks and Hawks, quote, discussed the idea of trading Davis Bertans and number 10 from Dallas to Atlanta for John Collins at 15. Immediately, and crucially, Jake noted those talks have not progressed. Again, they have not progressed. I will save the complete and grainy detail unless this somehow comes back together. But the gist of this, broadly speaking, would be the Hawks trying to save some money. I will leave with that because I think that was probably the biggest reason that I would do this. And part of that is that Bertans expires sooner and he is a little bit cheaper than Collins. Plus, of course, the 5-spot jump in the draft. If there's someone that you really love in the draft, that's a way to go up and get him. Of course, it makes you worse in the short term because I think it's pretty obvious, even if you don't like John Collins, Davis Bertans is a lot worse than John Collins. May even be the point where he wouldn't even be playing at all. I think he'd be a pretty deep bench guy. I think you look at Bertans as almost entirely dead salary, whereas even if you believe Collins is overpaid, he's not dead salary. He's obviously a good player. So anyway, all that said, I kind of laughed at the notion of people calling this a slam dunk from the Mavs side or the Hawks side. It is what it is. I will quote one person that I talked to from a front office in the league, not with the Hawks or the Mavs. And they said, and I quote, that deal might as well just be dollar signs for Atlanta, end quote. That was a text I got from somebody. So it's obviously financially motivated if that were to happen. Not a huge secret. It's kind of like the Herter trade. I know Tyler made that comparison yesterday. Not exactly the same thing, but certainly a little bit reminiscent of that, getting a little bit worse in the short term for money savings and a slight bump in the draft. Jake then noted later on that Dallas would prefer Capella to Collins in a deal like this, which is not surprising. And honestly, I think I am the same as Dallas. Even though I am pretty high on John, I think if you are the Mavs, Capella's on a better contract, number one. It's a shorter contract, and it's for less money. And Dallas needs desperately defense at the 5, given that they're building around Luka and Kyrie, it seems like. Mark Stein also echoed the cold water on the deal originally and the fact that the Mavs prefer Capella. Also, it might infer that Collins versus Capella is like a sticking point in the deal. With the Mavs asking for Capella doesn't make some sense there. I think the most fair deal that I can come up with around this structure would actually be Capella for Bertans and 10 without a pick going out. Now, I think it's reasonable to say that Capella is not worth the 10th pick on his own. Even as high as I am on Capella, I think the 10th pick is a slight overpay for Capella. But Dallas needs to win now. And importantly in this, you can never ignore this. I know this is not sexy to get into, but asset evaluations do matter in the NBA when it comes to matching salaries and trades and all that stuff. And Davis Bertans, again, is sharply negative salary. So even if you think that 10 is too much to pay for Capella on Dallas' side, throwing in Bertans is not just a throw-in. Like, that's super negative salary, and that, I think, balances it out a little bit. Now, I'll say this. There's no way, as the Hawks, I would do 15 and Capella for Bertans and 10. That's a terrible trade in my mind, flat out. I think that doesn't make any sense at all. Just because I think, look at it this way. The gap between Capella and Davis Bertans is a lot bigger than a 5-spot jump in the middle of a draft. If it was going from 6 to 1, sure. 7 to 2, sure. 15 to 10 is not that big of a jump. Even if you like a guy, that's not that big of a jump. And Capella versus Bertans asset-wise, it's not even close. Plus, you throw in the fact that Capella's just a lot better than Bertans. Anyway, I'll leave that there for now. Talk about it a little bit more. Obviously, you could have some tinkering on both sides of that. I think Dallas probably has other options, but I think that Capella makes sense. It has made sense for Dallas for a while as a potential target there. That 10th pick is probably their best asset to go ahead and get for Capella. Jaden Hardy, I think, is not going to be a part of that probably. Doesn't like great fit with the Hawks anyway. People have mentioned Josh Green. I can't imagine Dallas wants to trade Josh Green, to be honest with you. Maybe you throw in Maxi Kleber if you're Dallas, if you get the Hawks to put in something else, because Maxi Kleber is a lot better than Davis Bertans. There are other ways to do this, but that's something to keep an eye on, I'll say, because Dallas does make sense for Capella in a big way. And there's a little bit of smoke there coming out of all sides. It doesn't really matter now. This is a different sort of topic, but Jake reported that the Suns were a team that had interest in Collins. Also, Shams Charania on FanDuel TV said the same thing, that the Hawks and Suns were close to a deal again for Collins before the Bradley Beal trade. Probably close the door on that now, because the Suns really only have the one big salary to match as DeAndre Ayton. Now, I've seen a lot of DeAndre Ayton fake trades from fans in the last couple of days. No one that I have seen reported this. Maybe it's happened, I just missed it. But I think that Ayton has been a topic for a long time with the Hawks. I think last summer you could find podcasts where I talked about Ayton quite a bit. My general gist on Ayton is that he's obviously a good player. He's a young player. I think that's a contract that's not great. And I think that at this moment, he's not exactly what the Hawks need. Now, if the Hawks were just in love with DeAndre Ayton, could they overhaul the front court and get him? Maybe. I think if you're Phoenix, honestly, I say this with a straight face, I think Phoenix would rather have Capella than Ayton straight up right now, just for fit purposes, defensive purposes, etc. Ayton's obviously a lot younger, etc. I'm not sure if there's a way to do that deal anymore, especially with the fact the Hawks already have 2 centers on their team. Keep that in mind. It's Capella and Okongwu. So if you were to send one of those guys, you still have another one, trading for Ayton, et cetera. So I won't say completely cross the Suns off for John Collins, but it is a little bit harder now that they've used a lot of their matching salary in the Bradley Beal trade. Last thing from Jake Fisher. He reported that the Pacers, quote, explored a concept of Chris Duarte and draft capital for DeAndre Hunter back at the deadline in February. And I think that Indiana makes some sense for either Collins or Hunter, maybe more so Hunter this time of year. I know Caitlin Cooper has reported kind of what Indiana's looking for at the 4 is not quite what Collins is at this point, even though I think he'd be a great fit with Tyrese Halliburton and Miles Turner, but alas. So Hunter is a little bit more mystery man right now. I've admitted to that multiple times. This is a different front office now. Travis Schlenk's not here anymore, so I think Hunter is available. I don't know what they're looking for him, and obviously they have to replace him on the defensive end of the floor if anything goes forward. A couple more things to get to. I promise you we'll wrap up the rumor stuff in a second. But Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer tied the Hawks to the Celtics, the Raptors, and the Mavs with trade talks. No specifics outside of those guys, outside of Siakam, which I mentioned earlier from O'Connor. I'm kind of skeptical of that, but we'll see. Boston could be interesting, but I'm not sure what it looks like. Maybe they like Collins, maybe they like Capella. I don't know what it looks like there. No specifics there. Obviously, Dallas, they're looking for a front court upgrade with either Collins or Capella. And the last thing is the Derek Lively chatter. So I mentioned this with Tyler yesterday extensively. We won't do a lot on it now. But there is a round of buzz about the Hawks being in on Derek Lively. Matt Moore mentioned it, and it seems like it'll be at least the 10th pick to get there based on whoever's looking for him as the Hawks and the Warriors. Mark Stein reported that they like Derek Lively. Then Tuesday, ESPN's mock draft included the following phrase, and I quote, Lively has potential suitors right after this pick in Orlando, Oklahoma City, making him trade candidates for other teams at this spot, most notably Atlanta, which could aim to package number 15 pick with Clint Capella or John Collins to move up and draft him, end quote. So not anything new there with regard to Dallas. Again, I would, if it was Capella and 15, I'd be asking for Maxi Kleber back, and I wouldn't do it otherwise. Anyway, I would stress this. This could be real. I think Derek Lively kind of fits the. I'm not comparing Rudy Gobert, but if you're Quinn Snyder, you might see some stuff with a legit 7'5", 6'7", wingspan guy and Derek Lively. If they're not in love with the Kongwu, I don't know. I picked Derek Lively in the mock draft on the Locked On Podcast Network, so I think it's a good value 15. I would not be eager to trade up for Derek Lively, as I mentioned with Tyler on yesterday's podcast, but it's definitely at least possible. It's also possible that it's kind of a smokescreen, that they're like somebody else. So we'll see. This is a first-time front office. We don't have a lot of intel based on past history, so we're all kind of going a little bit along the same lines there. Personally, if I trade up, I'm looking for someone like Anthony Black or Taylor Hendricks, or even if you want to go bigger than that, Cam Whitmore, something like that. So that's a preference thing. I think that I like Okongwu quite a bit. And if I'm looking to trade Capella, I'm probably going to look to give the keys to Okongwu at the 5 for the most part. And I'm skeptical if you have Lively and Okongwu that, you can have those guys for sure. But if you went ahead to like maximized assets to go get Lively and have both of them, not the greatest fit. It can work. I think Okongwu could play some 4, but I'll say this now, probably say it again later on. Okongwu is a center. He might be able to play some 4 in the future, but he is a center. I know he's 6'8", 6'9". I get it. He's still a center. Derek Lively is one as well. Anyway, long story short, lots of smoke along the way. And that's it for all the rumor stuff for now. As I'm recording this podcast, there might have been even more that comes out. I'm recording this podcast at like 9 o'clock, 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. I try to wait a little bit longer, but if there's anything else that comes up, I'll write about it on a Patreon, or I will have a podcast or both between now and the draft on Thursday. All right, one more break to hear from our sponsors and have some mailbag questions at the end of the podcast. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, and baseball season is now in full swing. There's no better place to get on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers also get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win with FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. FanDuel also has great promotions each and every day. You get paid instantly when you win. The app is safe and secure, and they have every kind of betting angle that you're looking for and that you could possibly ever want. They cover the entire range of sports. That includes MLB, of course, NBA, WNBA, NFL, college football, college basketball, college baseball, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, and much more. And they have different wagering options as well: live betting, futures, player props, point spreads, totals, money lines, etc. There's no better place to bet on all of the baseball or basketball action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball trademarks used with permission. All right, a question from Peyton who says, "Hey, Brad, here's a random Hawks question. Doesn't John Collins make a lot of sense on the Thunder? I don't know what the return would be, but I think it would fit nicely next to Chet Holmgren." I got a question as well from another person about John Collins and the Pacers. Talked about that a little bit earlier on. Broadly speaking, I think that there are teams that fit Collins pretty well, and I think the Thunder's on that list. I think Indiana as well with Halliburton and Turner would be a great fit for him. OKC with Chet Holmgren, kind of the same thing, a long center, but not a bulky one. Collins bringing more of the roll man, with Holmgren being more of the pop guy. That makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure what Oklahoma City is. They have a lot of trade assets for the future, but right now today they're pretty good. They're like a French playoff team. If you add Collins, you're probably getting better than. So we'll see. I think that's the short answer. They have the assets that they want to trade for him. As far as the return, I'm not sure what it would look like, but if the Hawks want to dump salary, and I think they do on some level, OKC might be a way to do that if they like Collins. I don't know if they do, but that fit does make some sense. I think OKC does need more heft next to Holmgren. There are other teams as well. I think Brooklyn isn't exactly the same because Nick Claxton is not a shooter like Turner and Holmgren, but it seems like the Nets have liked Collins for a long time. That could be a team to monitor as well. Other teams that I might at least look at for Collins as like potential basketball fits. Again, this is basketball fits for me. I'm not reporting anything here in terms of actual interest, just basketball fits. I think Houston, given that they have a lot of money to spend, if they want to build around Alperen Sengun, I think Collins would be a good guy to pair with him. If they want to go with somebody else like Capella, honestly, or Brook Lopez at center, a little bit less. But honestly, a pairing of Brook Lopez at the 5 with Collins at the 4 would make a lot of sense. If they were to get Brook Lopez in Houston, as has been reported that Kelly Ouko is going to be, he's reported that at least going to try to do that down with the Rockets. I've always thought Miami would be interesting for Collins. I'm not sure how they would do it, but obviously he's from there, John is, and a little bit more size next to Bam. Not perfect, but that could work. Sacramento was a better fit before Keegan Murray got there, but I think if they're going to lose Harrison Barnes, and they might, maybe you move Murray more to the 3 and play Collins with Sabonis. I wouldn't mind that too much. I don't know what Toronto's doing, but that's another team that I think at least kind of fits with Masai Ujiri's philosophy. Maybe not with Jakob Poeltl next to him. That wouldn't be the greatest fit in the world, kind of like Capella now, but there you go. And one more thing, going back to the floor spacing center thing, wherever Porzingis lands, I've kind of always thought this. I know my friend Andrew Kelly's always said this as well. Porzingis is a great fit for Collins as well. I'm not sure where he's going to go because Washington seems to be in a full rebuild mode, so maybe he'll stay there for a little while, but I'm not sure it's going to be. But that's another guy to circle. Long story short, the only rumors so far about Collins are about Dallas. And that's not like a fit thing necessarily. It's more like just a talent upgrade / money thing. But I've always said this, he's not the easiest player in the world to fit. And that's a knock on him. I will certainly admit that that's a knock on him. I think he's a good player, gets lost sort of the forest through the trees kind of thing right now. But I think that he's a guy to, of course, keep an eye on. But there's a reason why he's still on the Hawks, and it's because they have not been able to sort of match their price they want for him in the last couple of cycles. Last thing, and this is more of a interesting question more than like an important one, but still is draft related. So Crush asks, I think you said with Tyler that Chris Murray is the most NBA-ready guy the Hawks could draft at 15 overall. I did say that, by the way. The rest of the question is, what does that list look like, and how much does that matter in your actual evaluation? So the second part of that question is this. I will say this does not matter much at all. And I said that with Tyler a little bit as well. The way that I would frame this is that, especially for a team like the Hawks that has been in the play in the last 2 years, it is also trying to win actively right now. They do need to be drafting for 2 or 3 seasons down the line. Importantly, this could change. They have 10 guys right now that are definitely rotation players, plus like some more fringy guys like Garrison Matthews if they want to use him, or Bruno Fernando. Those guys can play NBA minutes. They don't have quote unquote needs. Obviously, they have some talent needs, like perimeter defense is one. Obviously, shooting is one. But as far as like they could roll into the season right now, I wouldn't recommend this, but they could with this with those 10 guys and be totally fine. With that said, I'd be looking a little bit more long-term with the draft pick. Now, I still like Chris Murray because Chris Murray, I think, fits for a long time. Yes, he's old, but realistically, your rookie contract covers like till he's, 26, 27? That's fine. It's not like he's going to be 35 at the end of the contract. It is what it is. If everything's equal, sure, it'd be great to have a guy who can do both and be a high upside guy and a short-term play. Like AJ Griffin worked out great this way. AJ could play for the Hawks last year as he did, played great for them at times, but also clearly was not drafted because of that. He was drafted for a future-facing purpose. He was very young. He had health questions, but they looked at the ceiling and the upside there and said, great pick. I agree with it. I love the pick. Still do. Jalen Johnson, same thing. That was not a present value pick. That was a future pick. If you're picking a guy like Murray, again, who I do believe is the most NBA ready, it has to be some sort of long-term calculation as well. Like the appeal for Murray, for me, is not just for this coming season. It's the fact that guys like that who are combo forwards at 6'8", who can pass and play defense and shoot, like that's a very, very valuable skill set. He's not going to be a star, I don't think, by any means. But at 15 in the draft, if you can get a guy who could be maybe a starter for you long term, but especially like a top 7 guy in your rotation, that's a good value in a lot of ways. There is a balance to that, though. So I'm all about upside as well. Landry Fields mentioned upside in his comments last week. I don't think they're going to take Chris Murray if I had to guess right now for that purpose. They like younger guys, which they have in the last couple of years. Different regime, admittedly, but they could go younger. But to answer the question that I was asked about guys, again, this is the list of guys who would be more NBA ready right now that are also in play-ish in my top 20 at 15, etc. Murray would be the most NBA ready in my mind. A little bit higher. This is not going to be in order, but a little bit higher on the draft board overall. I think Taylor Hendricks and Jarris Walker could both play right now. They're a little bit different. Like they're both one and dones, but they're both like kind of more NBA ready for their defense. They wouldn't be stars right away, I don't think, but I like Hendricks a lot. I think I like Walker a lot too. I think Grady Dick is a guy who could shoot his way onto the court right now. I think defensively it might be a little bit dicey for sure, but could play off the bench, kind of in a way that AJ did this year in a little bit of a way. I think Jordan Hawkins would be interesting. I think his offense is NBA ready as a mover off screens and as a shooter defensively. We'll see. I think Colby Jones is like Chris Murray, but the next guy down from Xavier. Colby Jones is like a well-rounded, a little bit older wing player that I think could be on an NBA court right now, but also doesn't have a ton of upside. So that's a guy I wouldn't take at 15. Just to be very clear about that. In a trade down, sure, sign me up. Omax Prosper is a fast rising prospect from Marquette. His defense would play right now, I think, and his shooting will play right now. So that's a guy kind of like Murray and kind of like Colby Jones that I think could play real like 8th man minutes next year in the NBA. That's not why you draft a guy, but again, that's at least valuable. Ben Shepherd from Belmont, who came to the Hawks at one point to visit, potential late first round guy. Shooting, he's an older guy too. Polish, I think defensively might not be great early on, but probably could be okay. And then last guy is obviously a little bit younger is Derek Lively. Now, I don't believe Derek Lively would be very good as a rookie. I'm going to be very clear about that because most rookies, especially one and done guys, are not very good. That applies to Chris Murray too. Chris Murray, I think would be better than most, but most rookies are not very good. Anyway, Derek Lively in a small, like 15-minute a game backup center role, I think could play next year because of his defense. His offense won't be much. I think it's just going to be lobs and all that stuff. But if you put him in a tiny box and said, all right, Derek, we need you to do this one thing, I think he could do it pretty well just because of the size that he has. He's just so big, and the defense is. I hesitate to call anybody NBA ready at that age at center because there's a large learning curve on defense, but he is the tools kind of cover up a little bit of that stuff. So long story short, I would not draft for NBA readiness, but I wanted to answer the question in full, and that was the answer to that question that I was asked. Okay. We'll have more. I promise you at least one more podcast. Once I get deathly ill between now and then, I'll have one more show between now and the draft. If there's a trade before the draft, I will do my best. I'm going to go down to the Hawks facility. I will be down there at Emory starting in the afternoon on Thursday. So once I get there, I can't really record a podcast until I'm out of there, which is going to be very, very, very late into the night on Thursday. But if something happens Thursday morning, I'll do my best to get a podcast out to you again. But I think Wednesday night's what I'm aiming for the next episode. So please stay tuned. Please subscribe to the podcast. And please tell a friend about the show. If you have a Hawks fan friend in your life, do me a personal favor and share this podcast with them. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. Follow my Patreon written work on the Hawks at patreon.com/BT Rowland. Thank you again for listening to the podcast today, everybody. I really do appreciate it. And we'll see everybody next time.